Okay, so I got my treasure chest, but it's a little boring. I want to do a lot more with it. Of course, I can always come in, especially because I have so many of these modifiers on, and I can fix things up by selecting an edge or two, or a face or two, and just G middle mouse dragging down to give it some more shape and more size. But I want to give it an overall shape. I want to shape it into something much more robust. And there's a bunch of ways we can do this, and I'm going to show you how we can affect the entire shape of the model, and then we're going to add some smaller details to draw interest to certain areas. So in our modifier panel, I've shown you a lot of these like solidify and mirror, but one of the ones I haven't shown you are some of these deform modifiers. There's one here called lattice. And lattice is basically says if you make a cage, you can use the lattice to change the shape of the object. So I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to add a new lattice. Doesn't look like anything right now because I have to hit S to scale it up. And we want to shape it and fit it generally to our model. So SZ, because we want to get basically like it's a bounding box that should surround our whole model. SY. And then in our lattice properties, what the lattice does off the bat is if I take my object here and I say, what's my lattice object? It's this. Now this lets me go into edit and move individual points, and we can see I can change up the shape of my whole model. This is pretty handy, and if I kind of do that lattice on everything else too, I can get the other parts of the model. So this guy, let's add him the lattice as well. And I'll leave the lock off for now because we can work for a second on the lock on some other, I'll show you some other tools we can do on the lock. So you can see now if I move it, it's affecting everything. All right, that's cool. I'm able to nudge stuff in a big shape. But here's where lattices get really cool. In my lattice properties, which is this little green one with a little cross, I can change the resolution of my lattice shape. And by changing it to something like this, well now, by choosing, say, the left and right side, or actually, let's choose all these ones at the top. And then I'm going to SX. I'm starting to affect maybe the pitch of the object. Let's take these ones down here, same deal. SX. And I can start to tuck in by selecting these. SY. And starting to create a more interesting shape. Even going into these individual points and just like really raising something up can help change the definition of my shape. And by making a treasure chest like this a little rounder, so if I select all of these by just B for box select, SY, I can make it like really round and really help define it as a very cartoony looking treasure chest. Or I can do something like select these two and I'm going to say S and really stretch that out. And let's say X, pull that out and side and lift it up. And I give it almost like a very commanding kind of a look. Like it's a very aggressive kind of shaped treasure chest. Maybe it's like I think about like the boss key chest that they use in like Zelda games or something like that. But if I soften all this up, now I have the ability to just change the whole row shape. But if I want to change the model, it's cool because it's nice and flat and it's really easy to model on. But this is defining my shape. How about my actual like little lock here? So my poor lock has got lost in this whole thing. Let's pull it out a little bit. And I'm going to go to my mirror modifier and I'm just going to apply all because I want this to all be a solid piece. And you're going to see why. Put it into place. And I'm going to use a different tool now to actually change this. And I want to use the sculpt tools. So I'm going to select this object. I'm going to go to sculpting. And sculpting, I don't want mirror on this because sculpting has its own symmetry. If you come up to this butterfly symbol, you see X will do things in the X-axis, provided, of course, it's running along the X-axis. We can see from our symmetry there. I'm going to use only one tool in here. It's the only one I want to use. It's called G for grab, and F is going to denote the size of my brush. And now I just have something where I can sort of shape it. Maybe I can shape it into a bit of a key shape or symbol. And I can do this manually too, but sometimes it's fun to just organically play with these shapes because we get something a little bit more exaggerated. or we can play with something a little rounder or more interesting than we otherwise might have. So I like sometimes doing a lot of my shape changes in Sculpt because, well, I think it provides a more natural way of altering these shapes. So let's do the same thing with this. So Shield F, and I can, let's set this instead of symmetry along X, let's set it symmetry along Y. Oop, that's not right. It's the object symmetry. How did I rotate this guy? I guess X is correct for this if you did it like me. But now we can actually create something without having to make a bunch of changes to the geometry because we already have the handles that we want. We're making a slightly different and maybe more interesting shape. So this is pretty cool, but I'm getting a little distracted by some of these elements. I'm going to go and let's turn off that cavity. So I just want to look at the object by itself and how to create the best front-facing view of it. So we have these faceted edges on top, and I want to soften those. I want to make some of this round and some of the edges sharp. So I'm going to start by saying Shade Smooth, and then I'm going to come into this menu, my Object Data Properties. I'm going to go into Normals, and I'm going to turn on what's called Auto Smooth. And we can see right away it's created a pretty nice result for us. Auto Smooth says based on what angle, should it be smooth or should it be sharp? The lower we set this, the more likely it is to facet or look flat. The higher we set this, the more soft and we lose detail. For this object, usually somewhere I find between 30 and 60% is usually what I want. And sometimes I play with a little bit. I can also set things specifically. So if I set this, for instance, to 180, which is the max, I can also do the same thing by choosing some edges, Control E, and saying mark sharp, which will just denote those edges as sharp. But I think in this case, setting this to 30 is more than going to do the trick. Do the same thing here, Shade Smooth, turn on Auto Smooth. It's a little different because we see there's a lot more going on here. And this one, do the same thing. Auto Smooth only works though if Shade Smooth has been turned on. So now I got this, but I still I'm missing some details. Let's hide this lattice for now, just to get it out of my way visually. So one of the things that would be cool to have on this treasure chest is some little bevel edges because it reflects light really interestingly. So let's go to our modifier properties, and after or before my lattice, it doesn't matter. Let's do bevel, and let's do it before lattice because the lattice is creating some really weird shapes. Then in fact, we can hide it, turn it off in our display. And this bevel, as we can see, is just taking every edge and rounding it out. But the bigger I make the slider, the more subtle I can make the effect. And I can set it to just 1, which is fine. I can set it to 2, which is going to create something a little sharper. But we can see what it's doing is it's reflecting light off these edges. Let's get maybe here. Ooh, that looks nice. It's nice and soft this way. And I can turn my lattice back on, and we can see that it's creating some nice little reflections, because without it, you see we're losing those little edge reflections, the kind of, we call these Fresnel reflections, and it bounces off of everything. Now, usually in games, we do this with what's called a normal map, something I'll show you how to bake later when we do characters. But when we're doing something here and we're just kind of playing with it to present it, it's just going to create a nice little render for us. This isn't bad, but what else can we do with this to create more detail? Well, there's no real definition where the chest opens, so maybe let's add that. So I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to add one of my favorite modifiers, which is an edge split. So I'll show you how this works. It's pretty neat. I'm going to hit Control E, and I'm going to do a mark sharp here. Now, it's going to create a nice sharp edge like you see here, but I can do it one better by going to edge split. And what edge split will do, I'll do it before the bevel. Edge split will say anything that is denoted as a sharp edge, we're going to separate from each other. And then I got this bevel, and it's still not doing what I need to do because I need to add one more modifier to it. And this is called a solidify modifier, which makes things solid. I'm going to add it right after this edge bevel. And you see what happened is all of a sudden, it gave me a little seam along here. And depending on how large I make this, give me that same seam up here too, because anything I have marked sharp here. So let's undo that. Control E, clear sharp. And what this is going to do is, depending on the thickness I present to this, Let's set its offset to 0, which is right in the middle. And I can play with thickness a little bit. But it's going to give me that little seam where in actuality, if I, again, turn all these off, I haven't changed anything. It's all together. What it does is it just dynamically knows, cut it there, give it a little thickness, and then we can round it out. And it can provide a couple little non-destructive details. This is what I'm talking about, is the power of non-destructive modeling. Because if I want to change anything on my model, it's really easy to. And if I want to change the overall shape, it's really easy to. So I can add all kinds of details into it. And why not? Let's do that. Let's add a couple interesting details into this model. So I'm going to say viewport visibility off. And I'm going to show you how we can add maybe a couple studs to this model on top of the overall surface. So let's go into edit mode. And I want to add Shift A. Let's add another UV sphere. It's going to add it now inside of object mode. So it's in the object itself. I'm going to scale it down. And I'm going to also scale it in the Z-axis, like so. So L will hit my contiguous thing here. If I hover over it and hit L, it'll select that. If I hover over this and hit L, it'll select that. So it's an easy way of getting just the pieces I want. And I'm going to hit G. Ooh, I accidentally got that guy. Just want him. G, move it up. I'm going to hit my Z-axis and pick out where I want it to go. Lift it a little bit. Let's look at it from this X here, because we can hit R to rotate it. And I'm just positioning it onto the model like so. So now, if I turn my viewport visibility on, it's going to be in both places. It's pretty stretched out because of my lattice, but I could always add this later or make it part of a separate part of the model. I want to show you, though, just how we can add it onto what we're doing. Turn viewport visibility back off. And let's go into this edit here, and I'm going to say Shift D, and I'm going to rotate it. Hit Shift D, and rotate it. And I'm not being super precise, but in some ways it's making it a little bit more playful to not be so precise about it right now. And do this one. And now I'm going to select all of these by hitting L while hovering over each of them. And Shift D, middle mouse drag to get it just on that axis. Now if I turn this back on, I have it kind of studs everywhere up on top of this model, which is neat because it's going to help draw attention to the top of what I'm doing and away from the bottom. And it's also what the shape is helping me do, is to draw attention and pick out to the top. I mean, there's a ton of stuff we can do to add more details, and I'd love for you to explore with most of it, but most of it's just simple shapes. If you want to add spikes to this, you know, we can add spikes to it by adding cones on the surface, or make it teeth, or give it some extra interesting feature that we can pop into the surface of this model. So hopefully that's been, and give you some ideas and places we can go with this, and how we can use some of these modifiers to save us some time and do it non-destructively. All this edge split stuff you could totally do it destructively as well, but I like working this way so that I can kind of just lay something down and play with it and make changes to it later if I need to. All right, can't wait to see what everyone comes up with.